Donna was born into an unremarkable home in a quiet suburban town. From the outside, her family was the picture of normalcy. Her father, a factory worker, her mother, a homemaker, and her younger sister, Lily, 3 years her junior. But normal had never applied to Donna. Even as a child, there was something different about her. She was quiet, distant, watching the world rather than participating in it. Teachers praised her intelligence but noted her unsettling tendency to isolate herself. She never sought companionship, never craved the laughter or games that filled the childhoods of others. While neighborhood kids rode their bikes and played in the streets, Donna sat alone, absorbed in books, her expression unreadable. It was at the age of 11 that she found something that stirred her. Late one evening, flipping through TV channels, she stumbled upon a crime documentary. It told the story of a meticulous serial killer who had eluded police for decades. Most children would have been horrified by the crime scene photos, by the sobs of the victims' families. But Donna didn't turn away. She watched, she studied, she absorbed. By her teenage years, her fascination had turned into an obsession. Her room became a shrine to crime. Books on forensic science, criminal psychology, and case studies stacked high on her shelves. She stayed up late, the flickering light of the television illuminating her face as she devoured every documentary, every interrogation recording. Her parents noticed her unusual interest but dismissed them as harmless. She was quiet, disciplined, a good student. What they didn't realize was that her sense of morality was eroding. Donna wasn't interested in the victims. She was drawn to those who held the knife. At 17, everything changed. It happened in an instant. An ordinary walk home, the snap of jaws, a sudden burst of pain. A stray dog lunged at her, its teeth sinking into her leg. The attack was brief, the wound deep, but it wasn't the pain that lingered. It was the rage. Her parents told her to forget about it, to heal, to move on. But Donna didn't forget. That night, long after the house had fallen silent, she slipped out. She knew where the dog roamed, scavenging for scraps behind a garbage dump. She found it easily. It looked up at her, tail wagging cautiously, unaware of what she had become. She called to it softly, let it step closer. Then, with a single, calculated motion, she brought down the heavy object she had carried with her. The blow was precise, practiced in her mind long before it landed. The dog collapsed with a dull thud, twitching, its breath coming in shallow gasps. She stood over it, watching as the life drained from its eyes. She had expected remorse. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Power. Her hands were steady as she dragged the body away, disposing of it like an unwanted thing. She walked home under the cover of night, her pulse calm, her mind clear. She had crossed a line, and there was no fear, only certainty. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control, and she wanted more. The act of killing had given Donna something she never knew she needed: control. The rush, the power, the sheer exhilaration of watching life slip away under her hands. It was intoxicating. The stray dog had been the first, but it was never going to be the last. Her next victim was human. When her younger sister Lily confided in her about a man at a local bar, one who had harassed her, cornered her, made her feel powerless, Donna's protective instincts ignited. But her sense of justice was not the kind found in courtrooms or police reports. It was something far darker, far more final. She watched the man for days, memorizing his routines, learning his patterns. He was careless, predictable, arrogant. He thought himself untouchable. He was wrong. One night she followed him as he left the bar, her pulse steady, her mind sharp. She caught his eye, let him think she was interested, played into the false confidence men like him carried so easily. When she led him into a secluded alley, he didn't hesitate. He leaned in, expecting something else entirely. The knife was already in her hand. The first stab was precise, sliding between ribs with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head. The second ensured silence. The third was unnecessary but satisfying. She dragged his body to a nearby riverbank, methodically erasing any trace of her presence. The water swallowed him whole, and by the time the ripples faded, Donna was already walking away. This time there was no fear, only certainty. She had gotten away with it. The second kill changed everything. It was easier, cleaner. and it left her feeling untouchable. Over the next few years, she continued, her victims always the same. Men who had wronged others, harassers, abusers, those who saw themselves as predators. She was meticulous, each crime planned with surgical precision. She avoided cameras, wore gloves, discarded weapons in ways that ensured they would never be traced. But Donna had one weakness. She kept trophies. Each knife was stored carefully, a relic of the lives she had taken. She didn't clean them entirely, leaving faint traces of blood as a reminder of her work. On each blade, she wrote a note. Just a few words, detailing why the man had deserved to die. It was a ritual, a way to relive the control, the moment of decision. It was also a mistake. By the time she met Jake, she had killed at least 6 people. To him, she was perfect, intelligent, beautiful, kind. A woman who had her life together, who carried herself with quiet confidence. Jake, a soldier, was everything society deemed honorable. Disciplined, strong, loyal. He fell hard and fast. For Donna, Jake was an experiment, a test to see if she could be normal, if she could step away from the darkness she had embraced. Within a year, they were married. For 2 years, she played the role flawlessly. The devoted wife, the supportive partner. She cooked, she smiled, she kissed him goodbye before deployments, her hands as steady as ever. She almost believed it herself, but the darkness was never gone. When Jake was away, the urges returned. The nights stretched long, empty, and she filled them the only way she knew how. She hunted, she killed, and she hid her trophies in a place no one would ever think to look, her mother's house. Each time she returned home, she slid effortlessly back into her role. A loving wife, a normal woman. No one suspected a thing. Jake never suspected a thing. To him, Donna was his anchor, the calm in the chaos of his military life. She was steady, composed, exactly what he needed. But secrets have a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply they're buried. Donna's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. At first, the signs were small, locked drawers, late-night outings dismissed as errands, a reluctance to talk about her past. Jake noticed, but he let it go. He trusted her. And when she smiled, when she reassured him with that quiet, measured voice, he wanted to believe her. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of tension, a shadow he couldn't shake. One night, he came home from base earlier than expected. He found her in their bedroom, hurriedly closing a box and shoving it deep into the back of their closet. Her reaction was instant, too quick, too polished. She smiled, said it was just an old box of childhood memories. Jake nodded, pretending to believe her, but her hands were trembling, and that was something Donna never did. As the weeks passed, Jake became more watchful. He knew how to spot deception. It was part of his job, and now he saw it everywhere. The way she wiped down her shoes the moment she got home. The way she scanned her surroundings before stepping outside, like someone who was always being watched. Or worse, like someone making sure no one saw her leave. Then came the conversation with Donna's mother. It happened casually over coffee, her voice light with nostalgia. She was always into crime stories, her mother laughed. Obsessed with them, really, even as a kid. Jake smiled, but inside something shifted. It wasn't just an interest, it was something more, and he needed to know how deep it went. That evening, while on duty, Jake made a decision. He told Donna he'd be working late, but instead he drove to her childhood home. Her mother was warm, welcoming, delighted to see him. He played the part well, charming, affectionate, just a husband taking an interest in his wife's past. But his questions were careful, calculated. Was she always so private? Her mother hesitated. Oh yes, even as a little girl, she kept to herself. But she was a good kid, always helping around the house. Jake pressed further. Did anything ever change her? Again, that hesitation. A small pause before an answer that felt too rehearsed. Well, there was that time with the dog, her mother said. It bit her once, and she just wasn't herself for a while. Weeks, maybe. And then one day she was fine again. It was strange, but I figured she'd just moved on. But Jake knew better. People don't just move on from something that changes them. They bury it, hide it, build walls around it. He smiled, thanked her for the coffee, and excused himself to use the bathroom. But he didn't go to the bathroom. He went to Donna's old bedroom. The room had been reduced to a storage space, stripped of its former life. Yet remnants of Donna's past lingered. Faded posters of crime documentaries clung to the walls. Shelves sagged under the weight of books on criminal psychology. And an old desk sat covered in worn notebooks, their pages curled with time. Jake's pulse hammered in his ears as he moved through the room. He didn't know what he was searching for, only that a suffocating dread had settled in his gut, growing heavier with each passing second. Then, buried beneath a pile of discarded clothes in the back of the closet, he found it. A small locked box. It should have been insignificant. Just another forgotten relic of childhood. But Jake knew better. The lock was weak, easily picked, a skill he had perfected in the military. The moment the lid creaked open, his stomach clenched. Knives. A collection of them, each blade smeared with the dried, rust-colored stains. He forced himself to keep looking, his hands steady despite the cold sweat gathering at the nape of his neck. Small tags dangled from each handle, their edges worn but the writing still legible. Mark, harassed Lily Paul, followed me home Greg, Cat called me. Each name, each brief, handwritten justification, each a confirmation of the unimaginable. Donna wasn't just fascinated by crime, she was the crime. Jake shut the box, bile rising in his throat. His mind raced as he clutched it to his chest, his instincts screaming at him to leave. Back at home, he stashed it away somewhere safe, his thoughts a tangled mess of love, fear, and betrayal. The woman he had married, the woman he thought he knew, wasn't just hiding a secret. She was hiding bodies. For days, he wrestled with the truth, unable to reconcile the warm, devoted wife he had shared his life with and the cold precision of the killer whose trophies now sat within his reach. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't. But the knives didn't lie. He had to confront her. One evening after dinner, Jake set his fork down carefully, forcing his voice to remain steady. "We need to talk." Donna glanced up, her expression unreadable. "About what?" "I went to your mother's house." For the first time, he saw something flicker across her face. The barest hesitation gone in an instant. "I found the box," he continued. "Your box. I know what you have done." Silence. Then Donna did something that sent ice lancing through his veins. She laughed, a soft, almost disbelieving sound, like he had told her a ridiculous joke. She leaned back, shaking her head. "Jake, that's absurd. You know me. I've never hurt anyone in my life." But Jake had spent years detecting lies, and this one was as thin as glass. "Don't," he said, his voice like steel. "Don't lie to me." The warmth drained from Donna's face like a light switched off. The woman he knew disappeared, replaced by something colder, something calculating. "You shouldn't have done that, Jake." The way she said it, it wasn't anger. It wasn't even fear. It was disappointment. "I changed for you," she murmured, her voice unnervingly even. "I wanted to leave that life behind. Be someone you could love, but you had to dig, didn't you?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You couldn't leave it alone." Jake felt the walls close in. "Donna, you need help," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, controlled. "I have to turn you in. It's the right thing to do." Her expression didn't flicker. "If you think I'm going to let you ruin everything, you're wrong." She said it simply, like a fact. "I've worked too hard to keep this hidden." Her fingers curled against the table, her knuckles white. "And if you think I won't kill you to protect myself." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes locked onto his with something almost like regret. "You don't know me at all." A coldness unlike anything Jake had ever known settled into his bones. He had been trained for war. He had seen men die, but nothing, not the battlefield, not the chaos of combat, had prepared him for the moment he realized the real threat wasn't out there. It was sitting right in front of him, and it was the woman he loved. As Donna moved toward the kitchen, Jake's pulse hammered in his ears. There was no time to hesitate. He grabbed his phone, fingers steady despite the adrenaline, and dialed 911. His voice was low, urgent. Send the police. Now. He had barely ended the call when Donna reappeared, a knife clenched in her hand. Her chest rose and fell with sharp, uneven breaths. But her eyes, those eyes, were steady, cold. You shouldn't have done that, Jake, she murmured, the blade glinting under the dim light. Now you've left me no choice. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with, was gone. In her place stood something ruthless, something that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. Jake had faced danger before, trained for life or death situations. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was home, and the enemy was his wife. Donna, think, he said, keeping his voice even, his stance controlled. He locked his gaze on hers, searching for any sign of hesitation, any crack in the mask. You don't have to do this. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. You still don't get it, do you, she whispered. This is who I am, Jake. I tried to change for you. I wanted to, but you just couldn't leave it alone. Jake shifted his weight subtly, mapping his surroundings, measuring the distance to the front door. He needed space. He needed an opening. But Donna mirrored him, her movements deliberate, keeping the knife between them. You're not leaving this house, she said, her voice steady, her grip tightening. You ruined everything, and I won't let you destroy my life. The tension in the room pressed against his chest like a vice. He needed to stall, needed to keep her talking. We can fix this, he said, softening his tone. You need help, but we can get through this together. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Donna's face. Doubt, regret. But then, as if snapping back into herself, her grip on the knife tightened. She stepped forward. I don't need help, she hissed. I've done just fine on my own. You're the problem, Jake. You don't belong here anymore. Then she lunged. Jake reacted on instinct, shifting his body just in time to evade the blade. He caught her wrist, twisting it sharply, but Donna fought like an animal cornered. All desperation and precision. They collided, grappling for control, their struggle violent and unrelenting. The knife hit the floor with a metallic clang. Jake shoved Donna back and kicked the weapon across the room. But she wasn't finished. With terrifying speed, she grabbed a heavy glass vase from the table and swung it toward his head. He barely ducked in time, the air slicing past his ear as the vase shattered against the wall. Stop, Donna. Jake's voice echoed through the house. But she didn't hesitate, didn't falter. She was past reasoning. She spun toward the kitchen and Jake's stomach dropped. More weapons. She had planned for this. She grabbed a second knife, her expression dark with certainty. Jake barely had time to react before she was on him again. They crashed into the kitchen counter, the knife slicing through his arm. A hot, wet sting spread beneath his sleeve, but he didn't stop, couldn't. He twisted her wrist, forcing the knife from her fingers, and finally managed to pin her to the ground. His breath came in ragged gasps, his forearms slick with blood as he pressed her down, securing her wrist. It's over, he said, his voice low, firm. The police are on their way. You can't run from this. But Donna wasn't done. Her body tensed beneath him, her fingers groping blindly. And then Jake felt it. A sharp, searing pain as a shard of glass drove into his side. A final act of defiance. A final promise that she would never let him walk away unscathed. Jake's scream tore through the house, raw with agony as his grip faltered. It was all Donna needed. With a violent shove, she sent him sprawling, his body slumping against the floor, his breaths ragged and wet. She stood over him, the jagged shard of glass dripping red in her hand. You should have left it alone, she whispered. No anger, no regret, just a hollow finality. Then she drove the glass into him again, and again. Each thrust precise, methodical, devoid of hesitation. By the time she stopped, Jake's body was still. Blood seeped into the carpet, dark and endless, pooling around her bare feet. The silence pressed in, thick, suffocating, until the distant wail of sirens shattered it. Donna's head snapped toward the window. Red and blue lights flickered down the street. Time was up. She moved fast, grabbing the bag she had packed days ago. Cash, a fake ID, just enough to disappear. She couldn't stay. Not now, not after this. Slipping out the back door, she melted into the shadows. sprinting through the quiet neighborhood. Her mind raced. Get out of town. Get out of the country. But the world was already closing in. It didn't take long for the police to uncover everything. The box of knives, the blood-soaked floor, Jake's lifeless body. The hunt for Donna Miller began before dawn, her name and face flooding every news station, every social media feed. By the time she reached the airport, she knew she was running out of time. She forced herself to breathe, to keep steady as she approached the counter. The fake ID slid across the desk, her fingers steady despite the pounding in her chest. One ticket, one last chance. But as she neared the gate, she spotted them. Uniformed officers, patrolling, watching. She kept walking, forcing herself not to look, not to run, not yet. Then one of them saw her. Their gaze locked. Recognition flashed across his face. She bolted. The terminal exploded into chaos, shouts, the heavy thud of boots, the sharp bark of orders. She wove through the crowd, dodging grasping hands, forcing her way toward an exit. But she never made it. A weight slammed into her from behind, driving her to the ground. Hands yanked her arms behind her back. Cold steel snapped around her wrists. It was over. Donna refused to speak. Not as they processed her, stripped her of everything but a prison jumpsuit. Not as they locked her in a holding cell, her hands still smeared with Jake's blood. But the evidence spoke for her. The knives, the blood, the names etched onto each blade, each one telling a story of vengeance. The trial was inevitable, and when she finally did break her silence, she didn't beg. She didn't deny. She confessed. In chilling, unwavering detail, she walked the court through each murder. The stalking, the planning, the moment the blade met flesh. She never once said she was sorry. The courtroom was packed, reporters, spectators, grieving families, all desperate to understand how a woman like her could exist. A perfect wife, a devoted neighbor, a killer hiding in plain sight. The prosecution didn't need theatrics. The truth was damning enough. For years, Donna Miller lived a lie, the prosecutor said, standing before the jury. She was a wife, a friend, a member of this community. But behind closed doors, she was a predator. She hunted. She killed. And when her husband, a man who had given his life to serving this country, uncovered the truth, she silenced him. Coldly, brutally. This was not a crime of passion. This was murder. The prosecution presented a chilling array of witnesses, forensic experts, detectives, and even members of Donna's own family. Her mother, trembling and visibly terrified, described her daughter's secrecy, even as a child. Donna had always been different, she said, her voice quivering with regret. I knew she had anger, but I never imagined it would lead to this. When the defense spoke, they attempted to paint Donna as a victim of circumstance. They argued that years of trauma, the harassment of her sister and the attack by the dog, had pushed Donna to a psychological breaking point. They claimed she had acted out of a warped sense of justice, insisting she had never meant to harm Jake. But Donna's behavior on the stand shattered any hope of sympathy. When asked about the murders, she recounted them with chilling precision, her tone devoid of any emotion. I don't regret what I did, she stated flatly. They deserved it, every single one of them. Her coldness as she described each killing was terrifying, but it was her final words that sent shivers through the room. Jake betrayed me. He was supposed to love me, but he turned me in. He had to pay for that. The jury was visibly disturbed. Donna's utter lack of remorse, coupled with the calculated nature of her crimes, painted the portrait of someone far beyond help, a predator in human form. After just a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts, including 6 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder for Jake's death. When the judge pronounced the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole, Donna showed no reaction. She stared blankly ahead, her face a mask of indifference. But as she was led out of the courtroom, her gaze turned toward Jake's family, and her lips curled into a faint, malicious smile. You should have kept him out of it, she said coldly, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. The trial left a profound scar on all those who were involved. Jake's fellow soldiers held a memorial in his honor, remembering him as a man of integrity and courage. His family, devastated by the betrayal, struggled to reconcile the woman they had welcomed into their lives with the monster who had killed him. The media, relentless as ever, turned Donna's story into an obsession, with true crime documentaries and books diving into the depths of her twisted psyche. Psychologists and criminologists debated the root causes of her darkness, from her troubled childhood to her obsession with crime shows and her chillingly methodical approach to murder. Life in prison became Donna's new reality. For her own safety, she was placed in solitary confinement, as other inmates viewed her with a mix of fear and hatred. Most days she sat in silence, occasionally scribbling in a notebook, one that guards suspected was filled with more of her disturbing thoughts. Even in prison, Donna remained a figure of macabre fascination. She agreed to a televised interview for You, where she reiterated her lack of remorse. "I did what needed to be done," she shrugged. "If that makes me a monster, so be it." Donna's story became a grim cautionary tale, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving. Jake's legacy as a dedicated soldier and loving husband was overshadowed by the shocking betrayal that led to his brutal murder. As for Donna, her name became synonymous with cold-blooded murder. Her case was studied by experts as an example of how unchecked anger and a desperate need for control could lead to horrific consequences. In the end, there were no winners, only shattered families, lost lives, and haunting questions about how someone like Donna could have hidden her true nature for so long. But for those who had known Jake, one truth remained. He had died trying to do the right thing, and his courage had ensured that Donna's reign of terror had come to an end.